Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're uncovering the structural blueprint of the human upper face using our source notes. We're zeroing in on the maxilla, the bone that literally shapes your smile, anchors those upper teeth, and acts as the entire foundation for your facial structure. It is an absolute marvel of human development. Let's get right into it.
So, you might be wondering, how does the upper face actually build itself from scratch? I mean, how does this microscopic process, kicking off in just the first few weeks of intrauterine life, perfectly shape your palate and your face? It's an incredible architectural feat, and we are going to decode exactly how it happens.
To map this all out, we're going to hit 5 key areas. 1, the origins of the upper face. 2, the primary centers of ossification. 3, the 5 directions of bone growth. 4, the secondary centers of ossification. And 5, we'll tie it all together with the fetal developmental timeline.
Starting with Section 1, the origins of the upper face, we're laying the foundation here.
Now, it's really interesting to see the strict division of labor in the viscerocranium, our supporting facial skeleton. The maxilla is entirely responsible for forming the upper face, whereas the mandible handles the lower half. 2 totally distinct structures taking 2 totally distinct developmental journeys.
But before we trace how it grows, let's just picture the final product. A fully formed maxilla is basically a large pyramidal body featuring 4 very distinct processes: the zygomatic, the frontal, the alveolar, and the palatine. Oh, and it also houses the expansive maxillary sinus, which happens to be the largest paranasal air sinus in your whole body.
Here is the absolutely crucial part. The maxilla undergoes pure intramembranous ossification. In plain English, we're building this bone entirely from scratch. There's 0 primary cartilage acting as a scaffold here. Instead, bone forms directly from mesenchymal tissue, which itself is derived from highly specialized neural crust cells.
So, where exactly does this tissue originate? Well, this whole construction project starts entirely within the first pharyngeal arch, which you'll often hear called the mandibular arch. By the 4th week of development, we've got 5 of these arches, but it is specifically this first one that gives off the maxillary process to kick off the nasomaxillary region.
Moving right along to Section 2, the primary centers of ossification. Think of these as our groundbreaking sites.
Now, to help you lock in this pretty dense developmental process, just remember the rule of 3s and 5s. We'll start with 3. There are exactly 3 primary centers of ossification for the maxilla.
Right, so we aren't just starting from a single point. You have one center dedicated to the maxilla proper, and 2 separate, highly specific centers dedicated entirely to the premaxilla.
Let's zoom in on that first one. The center for the maxilla proper is hyperspecific. It sparks into existence during the 6th week of intrauterine life. And its location? Insanely precise. It pops up in the mesenchyme above the canine fossa, literally right at the termination of the intraorbital nerve, just above where the canine tooth dental lamina is forming.
And then the other 2 primary centers, the premaxillary ones, follow right on its heels. The main premaxillary center shows up in the 7th week right above the incisive fossa. Fast forward just a bit to the 10th week, and the paraseptal or prevomerine center arrives at the ventral margin of the nasal septum before quickly fusing with the palatal process.
Okay, Section 3, the 5 directions of bone growth. This is where we really start expanding the bone.
Remember our rule of 3s and 5s? Well, here is where the 5 comes in. From those initial starting points, the bone doesn't just expand into some random blob. It grows outward in 3 dimensions, but it strictly follows 5 distinct structural directions.
Let's quickly cycle through them. First, it extends posteriorly toward the zygoma. Second, it shoots superiorly up toward the frontal process and nasal capsule. Third, it reaches anteriorly into the incisor region. Fourth, it drops downwards to form the alveolar plate, to make room for those developing tooth germs. And finally, number 5, it spreads medially. That last one is incredibly important because this medial growth is what forms your hard palate.
All right, Section 4, the secondary centers of ossification. Time for some structural backup.
Jumping back to our rule of 3s, exactly 3 secondary centers appear around the 8th week of intrauterine life to give the maxilla some extra support. We've got the zygomatic center, the orbitonasal center, and the nasopalatine center.
Now, remember earlier when we established that the maxilla is a purely intramembranous bone with 0 primary cartilage? Well, there's a fascinating little loophole here. A secondary cartilage, specifically the zygomatic or malar cartilage, acts as a temporary secondary support system. It actually contributes a lot to the zygomatic process and, for a short time, to the general growth of the maxilla, though our sources do point out there's still a bit of debate among experts regarding just how much it contributes.
Almost there. Section 5, the fetal developmental timeline. Let's look at the actual construction schedule. When you pull all these anatomical milestones together, it is wild how fast this happens. In week 4, the branchial arches appear. Then, week 6, the maxilla proper center sparks up. Week 7 gives us the main premaxillary center. Next, week 8 brings those 3 secondary centers online. And finally, week 10 rounds it out with the paraseptal center. All of this incredible foundational architecture is completely locked in over just a few short weeks.
So, to summarize the absolute essentials for you, the maxilla is a pure intramembranous bone that originates from the first branchial arch. And if you take nothing else away from this, just remember those numbers, 3 and 5. 3 primary centers, 5 distinct directions of growth, and 3 secondary centers. It's just a beautifully organized system of biological engineering.
It really puts things in a perspective, doesn't it? So I'll leave you with this final thought. The next time you look in the mirror or examine a patient, how does understanding this incredibly precise prenatal blueprint, built completely from scratch in just 10 weeks, change the way you comprehend the fascinating complexities and even the anomalies of human facial anatomy today? Keep that in the back of your mind.